Hi there, my name is Philip Eidson. I want to welcome you to the Art of Procurement podcast, the podcast that helps you, a forward-thinking procurement professional, position yourself and your team to proactively take advantage of the revolution that's taking place in procurement today. By interviewing industry trailblazers and sharing insights from our own experiences, my team and I pull back the curtain and shine a light on the strategies, tactics, and tools that procurement teams are using to elevate their impact. And here at Art of Procurement, we're busily preparing for our next digital event, AOP Mastermind Live 2022. Taking place on October the 4th and 5th, we're going to be exploring how procurement can 10x its impact. We'll have inspiration from athletes, insight on solving the leadership challenges associated with driving significant change from a multiple-time company president and CEO, and we'll have how-to sessions that help us build the tech stack that's necessary to succeed. Now, to register for free or to get priority access to the Watch Again videos, go to artofprocurement.com/mastermindlive. That's artofprocurement.com/mastermindlive. And so, with events on my mind, I thought today I'd share with you a conversation from our last digital event, which was Categorypalooza 2022 that happened in the summer. Now, this session, which is titled Improving the Flexibility of Your Category Management Skills, was hosted by my Art of Procurement partner, Kelly Barner, and featured marketing category expert Steve Trussell. Steve shared the core approaches that have served him well during times of volatility and change. He'll also describe the strategies he uses to stay on top of evolving categories while continuing to deliver value. So, with all that said, let's go into this week's conversation.
Let me introduce you all to my guest for this session. I'm joined by Steve Trussell, who's the Chief Consultant at Total Sourcing Solutions, as well as one of our SpendPros. So, hi, Steve. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Gail. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. Now, you're going to give us a little bit of an intro to one category that I think is associated with some anxiety for many procurement professionals, and that's marketing. So before we dig into some more specifics and potentially a framework that will help procurement handle marketing spend, could you give us just sort of a quick rundown on where is marketing spend right now?
Well, I think you're right. It is kind of it's a little scary to folks, a little intimidating because there's a lot of different aspects to it, and it continues to change these days. I mean, traditionally it was always just paper, right? It's just what are the inserts you're going to have in the Sunday paper, and maybe some television commercials and things like that. But now you've got internet connectivity, you've got all those kind of things that are going on, things that are on the phone, you've got mobile type of apps and that kind of thing. So it changes. And what gets really challenging is measuring the effectiveness of whatever your marketing campaign and what you're paying for. Are you getting what you asked for from your supplier? And I think a lot of that goes back to really understanding what are you trying to accomplish. And I think that to me, that when I first got into handling marketing, I've handled it like a lot of different other categories. It was one of those things that it was a little intimidating. Coming out of manufacturing, moving to something like marketing, it's a little more nebulous. You know, when you're running a manufacturing facility, you see stuff coming off the back line, right? You understand how many cars you built, how many blenders you built, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. It's easy to measure what's going on, and you see the scrap, you see that kind of thing. But when you start talking about paper, and you start talking about clicks on the web, and you start talking about views on commercials and that kind of thing, it gets a little bit more difficult to manage. And you just in my opinion, you have to break it down into those chunks. But the first step is understanding, what are we trying to accomplish as a company? And sometimes that's the hardest question to get with your marketing team is distilling it down to, are you going after brand awareness? Are we trying to drive our brand higher? Because that's a different type of spend, and that's a different type of metric. Are we trying to drive people into the stores, and trying to drive sales? That's a different type of metric. So you have to be able to have that conversation with that marketing team to understand, what am I looking for? And then that kind of leads you to, who's the type of supplier. And if you're brand new into this thing, you don't want to get involved with one of the top guys, because they will, they'll run, for lack of a better phrase, they'll run over you. They'll own that relationship, right? They'll come into it with all the knowledge and all the skill sets that they need. They'll own that. You might want to move in with a niche type of player, a smaller organization that's closer to you, understands your business, really gets to understand it, and kind of help you build out that roadmap. And that is the next step in how you manage it, I think, is having that roadmap in place about what are we going to accomplish, and then what are the metrics what are the things we're going to measure at the end, and what does that mean, and what am I getting for my dollars?
Now, one of the things that really speaks to me about what you just mentioned is being very clear about what you're looking to accomplish before you start down that road. One of the things that we at Art of Procurement have been talking about for a long time, and that we're increasing our focus on given today's economic conditions, is aligning procurement with desired business outcomes. Right. And so it's not about what can this provider do, or what will the savings be, or how will we even measure the supplier, but what are we looking to achieve? Mm-hmm. And so the mindset of procurement and the mindset of what the company needs marketing to achieve for them is incredibly important. So what I'm actually going to do now, and this was a cool part of what we did in the lead up to Categorypalooza, we asked the Art of Procurement community some specific questions. And I'd like to bring in a piece of poll data that we had collected specifically that relates to how far into the future you have certainty around your planning horizon. So this is pretty much landslide. About 63% of the people that responded feel comfortable making commitments, and they feel comfortable saying what demand is going to be 6 to 12 months out, which is not a terribly long time when you think about the length of a typical procurement contract. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, it goes down from there. So, Steve, can I have you offer up any thoughts or reflections, either in general or specifically related to the marketing category, that come to mind when you look at this data?
In general, when I look at this data, I'm actually surprised that the number's not higher than 63%. And I think it probably is changing on a daily basis. Yeah. I think it's probably people are getting much more conservative about those commitments and concerned with those commitments, and getting nervous about it. I know with some of the clients that I'm talking to these days, it really is. And it obviously depends on the category, but everyone is, they're worried and concerned about making a commitment beyond, the first of the year in some cases. Yeah. So I think that what I like to view it as, I live in South Florida, and we spend 6 months out of the year as preppers, because you're watching the hurricanes, right? You're watching the National Weather Service, the Hurricane Center, to see how many days you have till the next storm. Now, we've been fortunate to this point, but we're getting into the peak season. So, invariably in June, you hear in every subdivision in South Florida, people starting up their generators. They're getting ready to make sure that they run. They're getting the water out. They're doing all those kind of things, getting prepped. And then as you get closer, if you have a storm coming, people are dumping water out of their pools, and it's the whole thing. Yeah. So my point being that I think that preparedness is the answer, and not just preparing for right now, but if you look in the preparedness field, you look in the military, you look in some of the disaster preparedness places, you have what they call a PACE plan, which it fits in all different arenas. You see a lot of it in communications, but it fits in all different arenas: primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency. And you have a different path that if this happens, then I do this. If this happens, then I do this. And I think that is what you build out. And it's, a lot of people will say that they have a plan, they understand their category, and they know what they're going to do, but what is that, right? Yeah. And what are those steps you're going to take? And what are those steps you take now in some cases? If you have a contingent or an alternate, that means that supplier is tooled up and ready to go right now, right? Yeah. So in order to do that, you need to have engaged with them either at a high level in conversations. They understand your business. You've got NDAs in place. You've got all the things in place to flip a switch and move, or you're actually doing some business with them. And I think that fits in every category, but in marketing, it really would be a key around, maybe you have a couple different people within your advertising space. You have if you can afford it and you build it in your budget, maybe having a marketing consultant on retainer, that you see something changing. Hey, what should I do here? Right. Having those type of things in place to be able to manage that. And another thing I'll mention here is a key, and this came up in my mind when the Ukrainian situation popped up, is, understanding your supplier's supply chain. And every category has a supply chain. I don't care what it is. There's a supply chain of something, right? Whether it's a service or a goods, there's a supply chain of something. Understanding where that comes from, and you've done a lot of things, Kelly, around, the grain harvest and things like that in the Ukraine, and fertilizer and things like that. But there's also back office type of things that are in the Ukraine, as far as server fields and all that kind of server places and all that kind of stuff. To where do you have a backup for that? If you've got your call center in a certain country and they have an earthquake and they're in an earthquake prone area, what's your contingency if they do to move it there? And is it with that same supplier who has a backup already in place somewhere? Or do you have another supplier you already have engaged that has access to your systems and can do a download and you can move forward with? What are the type of things that you put in place to be able to do that? And to me, that answers a lot of those questions around the uncertainty that comes in. It may not be exactly the right answer, but you can start moving. It's the old Colin Powell thing around having 40% of the data and 80% chance of success. Go ahead and get started. You'll figure the rest out on the way. It's that same type of thing, and not standing still and waiting. You've got those plans in place. Another thing you do when you do that is you communicate that within the organization, with all your stakeholders within the organization, so they know that, hey, we've got a plan, we're set. And so that if something does change, they get a call from a supplier or whatever, there's a move or there's something going on, they understand it's part of a bigger picture, right? And they can help to communicate that and manage that.
Well, one of the things that I actually think is interesting that I want to call out before we dig into the PACE framework in more detail, and that's the idea that you've talked about prepping and we've talked about planning, and we know that the PACE framework itself is sort of military inspired. So it comes with a lot of intensity and structure. But just to remind everybody, the focus of our section is actually about flexibility. So what we're saying before we dig into the details of this is that you can plan and you can prep and you can have a solid training-based framework without having it lock you in, right?
Right. Yeah. You don't have to, and that's one of those things where you can. It really goes down to how much can your organization handle? How much can it absorb of all of that, of having multiple plans going on at a time? And you may be in a situation where you don't have the bandwidth to be able to act, and that's part of your PACE, right? Part of that understanding is, I don't have the bandwidth to do that, so I may have to bring in somebody on contract. But you communicate that to a wider organization and say, hey, we can't implement as much as we want to right now, but at least we know the direction we'll go in, right? We can step out quickly without having to wait and step back and say, okay, what do we do? We know what we're going to do. It just may take us a little bit longer, and that's setting expectations around that too.
Yeah. So if you would walk us through the PACE framework, either in the context of the marketing category or potentially using a couple of marketing spend type examples.
I would. So for instance, like I said, it's primary. Who's your primary supplier, right? You have an alternate that's the immediate if then. So if you have it's an easy switch. Either there's no switching costs or not. Or it's, for instance, within marketing, if you've got a spend and you've got in your, I'm trying to articulate a good one here. Say in your advertising, your digital advertising, you've got a company that uses a lot of web designers off-site or a lot of web, software folks that's off-site in one country. And say I'm just going to use the example I used before, say it's earthquake prone, right? So your primary is there, understanding their supply chain. They have a lot of people off-site that do their work for them. What if there's an earthquake? What do they do? Do they have a backup in another country that they can move it immediately to? Okay, if that's the case, then that's probably, and you're happy with that supplier. That's probably your alternate, and you might want to run some campaigns through that alternate group, that alternate center, just to make sure that everything works well. Right, to make sure that you work out all the kinks ahead of time and you've got it set up right and structured right. So that's your alternate. A contingency might be, I need to move from supplier A to supplier B. So that's a little bit more, right? I may need to find them, maybe be in another country again, or there may be, that kind of thing. So you need to move to that other supplier. And that takes a little bit more work. So you're not going to do that unless it's a category, a 7.8 on the Richter scale, and it wipes out all power in that country for weeks, right? That's the only time you're going to make that move. And then emergency is if, you have, and this is a weird example, right? So you have the earthquake in the one country. You've got to move to another supplier, and they have an issue in their country, right? Whether it's an uprising or they're in a hurricane situation. I'm using that as an example. You've got an emergency, right? So then do you have to spend a lot more money and do it back in the U.S. with one supplier or with one country? I mean, do you have to, is that the situation? So there's a cost in all of those, right? So the emergency is going to be a much higher cost, switching into a much higher country in cost. And you're not going to do that unless you really, really need to.
Yeah. And depending on the type of marketing provider and certainly the size of the marketing provider that a company is working with, it's actually not out of the question that you would be working with somebody who's located very far away from your company. I mean, there are a lot of countries where there is incredibly skilled, creative, talented people who not only can strategize, but then can do the graphic design work and the messaging work and the copy work. So it's no longer the days of assuming that everything is coming from Manhattan in New York, right? This isn't Mad Men anymore when it comes to.
And a lot of those guys in Manhattan and New York are outsourcing a lot of that work themselves.
Exactly.
Right. So they're already doing that. So to your point, going back to putting my procurement hat on, that's a layer of margin that you might want to cut out by going direct, but there's risk in that matter, right? Yeah. So going to those guys in New York, the madmen, to your point, they may have 2 or 3 guys they have contracts with. So you may not see the issue. If there is an issue, they may solve it. I used to call it, being a duck on a pond. A duck swimming across a pond, moves really smoothly, but the feet are going like crazy underneath the water. It's the same thing, right? I mean, you don't understand all the work that needs to be done. So that's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that I find interesting, and we've had quite a few discussions today around how procurement specifically is helping their company respond to economic pressure right now and responding to requests for increases from suppliers and trying to negotiate advantageous deals. But the way that all of that actually affects marketing spend might be a little bit different. And I think this goes back to your point about understanding what you're trying to do. It could be that marketing is trying to increase awareness to bring more people into your target consumer base or into your funnel if you're a B2B. But you might also be trying to increase the brand perception or the brand valuation so that you can justify charging a premium to absorb some of these added costs.
It's a great point because it's harder to tie A to B. Right. With a lot of the spend categories that we traditionally deal with, you can tie cost savings to or expenditure or cost savings to the bottom line.
Yeah.
Good or bad. Right. And have I offset costs? Have I reduced costs? Have I controlled inflation? Whatever. When you're talking about marketing, it's a little more nebulous. And this goes back to how do you measure it? It may not be immediate. It might be a year down the road. If you're doing brand awareness really and brand perception change, it can take a while to do that. And you measure that differently through Nielsen, through some focus groups, some other stuff that is not as easily tied back to the bottom line when you specifically negotiate that contract. Yeah. So it's much more difficult. But here again, that goes back to, in my opinion, that part of the category management is communicating that to your stakeholders internally and making sure everybody understands how that flows and being the subject matter expert in that from a sourcing and supplier standpoint, understanding, hey, it's going to take 6-8 months to get this up and rolling. We'll have Nielsen reports at that point in time. And then we'll be able to tie back, was it effective or not? And we'll have SLAs in place that if it's not, then we can cancel the contract or what have you, or we'll have incentives. If it does drive, we'll pay the supplier a little X amount, at that point in time. So.
Yeah, I think it's excellent that you bring up this point of category expertise because I'm sure a lot of other professionals are in the same boat. I've worked on teams where there was someone dedicated to marketing or people would maybe take a rotation through that category. But in a lot of cases, you don't have a marketing background. And so especially when it comes to creative work, anything visual, anything that even borders on artistic, those of us who are very happy being analytical with our spreadsheets are sort of at a loss.
Right.
When and we meaning procurement, when we're in a conversation with either a marketing supplier that has a very creative product or with the marketing category expert, a marketing budget owner in our company, Do you have any advice for how to handle that horrible moment that can rear its head where the person says, well, you just don't understand marketing. You're in procurement. You don't understand. We need to let the supplier charge all this money, or we need to allow it to be nebulous. We need to not understand what they're doing. That's what makes it marketing.
Yeah.
How does procurement that is data oriented and analytical function in that moment?
Well, there's a dividing line there, and there's a cost for everything, right? We understand that, we know that, but there's a dividing line between creativity and managing cost, right? And that's the tricky part. That's a tricky part, is being able to allow the supplier and giving them credit for that. But and that's, to me, that's where it goes back to very early on, setting, without the supplier involved, with those marketing team members, what does success look like? And it's not just about how pretty the output is, it's what are we delivering for the company? And that's why you tie it back to specific things that you can measure, like brand awareness in a Nielsen report, additional sales, additional margin, all those kind of things. How do you tie that back, right? And making sure you have that ticked and tied with them. And then it becomes that makes the conversation much easier, because then when the supplier does come in with our creativity, okay, how does it tie back to these 5 things we're going to measure you to, right? Yeah. And it also helps you to put together that supplier performance, that scorecarding, and that quarterly business review type discussion becomes much more effective than if you don't have that in place, because then it does get really nebulous around, well, we need to spend this extra money because of this. Well, we didn't sign up for that. B, how does that drive the metric that we've all agreed to? And so that gives you that ability to separate the creative from the cost management side of it.
Yeah. Now let me pause here and bring in, because I'm actually watching the questions come in, and there's some interesting things that I want to bring into the conversation. This question from Colin. Now, these two sound similar, but with all of us being in procurement, I think we all feel the difference here. For the marketing category, is the business's primary objective for procurement to deliver better value for the same money being spent, or for procurement to be able to drive down prices? I love that very small but important nuance.
That's a big difference. And and that is something that is a challenge, because we all know how budgets are set within companies.
Yes, we do.
You have an amount of money to spend. If you don't spend it all, especially when you're talking about sales and marketing and some of those, I use the word nebulous, and I'm not using it in a negative connotation. It's just it's historically not tied back to specific metrics, right? It's hard to. If you're in those type of categories, if you don't spend it, you don't get it next year, right? It's kind of like travel. But so how do you balance between the two? That's a great question. I think that there is value in, and I've approached that, and sometimes that's how you get buy-in when you're first stepping into an organization in a marketing type of category. That's how you build credibility, right? Is, okay, I'm not going to come in immediately and say, okay, we got to take 10% out, but how do we make sure we're getting the value we need for that out of that budget? And that really ties back to, okay, are we spending too much for what we get, right? If we go back and we look at because like we said, there's a cost for everything. There are cost drivers for everything. You can manage it down to whether it's web clicks or, brand awareness points or whatever it is. You can measure it back to that and set those metrics in place. Then you really can manage that to say, yes, we're getting value for our money. Yeah. And it really comes into play sometimes when you're talking about, a supplier coming back with a price increase. So,
absolutely.
Okay. I understand that. I understand your price is going up. What am I getting for that? Right. I have to manage my costs too, and so what am I getting for that additional money? It's a chance for you to go back really, and sometimes dive into details you haven't been able to dive into before, but there is a balance. And I think you have to, and sometimes it's how you present it. Right. And it's going back to, if you want to present it as a cost reduction type of activity, then you've done your due diligence around, here are the cost drivers in this category. Here's what the baseline should be cost is. And that we're just trying to get it back to the market should be cost. We're paying more than we need to for that. If we want to continue to pay that, great. I want more money for it. I mean, I'll give you, it's an analogous example, but in one of my previous lives working for a major retailer, we had a private label business in small appliances.
Yeah.
One of the things we used that for was as a bellwether for our branded products. And the merchants would come to us knowing that we managed that private label business and said, okay, supplier X, branded supplier X is charging me X amount for a 6-cup coffee maker. Well, we know how much our private label branded coffee maker costs. There's a difference. It's 15% or it's 25%. Is that brand worth that? Am I getting that extra 25%? Right. So it's about understanding those breakdowns and really getting into that. So if you want to go at it from that direction, that's really kind of the baseline in my mind as we talk through this. Is understand what that should be cost is. Make sure that you're paying that market price. And if you're paying higher than that, that gives you some leverage to go back and say, hey, look, the market's here. Yeah. We're here with you. What can I get? Tell me why I need to be paying you 15% more, right? And what am I getting for that extra 15%?
Yeah. Now, Steve, we actually opened the day with Philip Eidson cautioning everybody that this event was purely live. And I'm actually going to prove that because the next question I'm going to ask you, I'm going to bring in a spontaneous prop.
Uh-oh.
This is one of my favorite little desk toys. It's a squishy prop.
Okay, yeah. Uh-huh.
So the question is, I promise this ties in. With COVID's effect on society, how has marketing procurement changed around where those budgets are going? So where back in the day, everybody was going to conferences or doing customer visits. They wanted a little squishy truck to send home with them. Today, maybe more of the category has moved digital. What transitions in terms of where that contract spend is going have you seen in the category?
There's been a big shift. There was almost an immediate shift, right? I mean, you shut off all the other travel, everything went digital. Now there's that creep back of people coming back online again. But I think that there is going to be a very detailed view, especially with the market, the economic conditions we're in right now. Yeah. We're not going to go full bore back to everybody going to all the conferences 100%, right? You've really got to show the value to your company to spend that extra cash, especially when a lot of the conferences are staying, at least hybrid, right? You can sign in and log in and watch it from home, or you can go live. There's definite benefits to going live and networking and those type of conversations you have outside of that, but companies are still strapped. They're still coming back from that whole COVID situation, and with the economic situation we're now with inflation, people are watching all those dollars. So I think you're going to see a continued emphasis on really having to prove the value of being in person. So all those squishy toys, I mean, they may get mailed, but they're not going to show up in Orlando or Dallas or wherever the conferences used to be. Yeah. And I think you're going to have that's going to be the thing. I honestly think it's going to kind of mirror the whole work situation, the work from home hybrid type of situation. Mm-hmm. I think it's going to mirror that going forward. There's going to be, if you want to come to the shows, great. If you can get here, great. If not, we're going to have it online. And I think it's really going to be that type of structure. Yeah. And the spend is going to match, and the spend on promotional items is going to match that.
Okay. Now, as we start to wind down our time, I actually think we've done an ambitious thing in this 30 minutes. We've taken something structured like the PACE framework with a complex category like marketing, and we've combined them to talk about how planning and preparation can still allow you to be strategically flexible. If you were to give people one sort of takeaway, what is something that you would recommend people do, something that you would recommend people think about, a question you would recommend people ask that's sort of like their little virtual squishy truck takeaway from this session?
I would say 2 words: if then. If this happens, then what do I do? Mm-hmm. Constantly be thinking about that, looking at your categories, whatever they are. If you have multiple categories, it's going to be a different answer, right? Depending on the product. But I would continue to look at, if this happens, what do I do? And have something in place that you can at least get moving with, right? And you may not have it completely gelled and distilled down, but at least you have a direction to go that you can communicate to the rest of the organization. And then I would continue to be a sponge when it comes to, especially in marketing. And sometimes, for me, being an old guy who started working when they still had fax machines on the thermal paper, sometimes you get into some of these new marketing categories, augmented reality and all this other kind of stuff that goes on. gets a little bit. I got to ask my teenagers what it's about, right? And I have to be humble in that situation to know that I don't particularly understand it, nor do I operate that way. But try to put yourself in the shoes of your customer, the target customers that you have within your company.
Yeah.
Understand what is going to drive them to purchase, right? What is going to drive them to utilize your company's goods or services, and become an expert in those areas as much as you can in the amount of spare time that you have while you're trying to manage cost increases and inflation coming at you every 5 minutes, right?
Yeah. No, I think that's awesome, Steve. So I think that's a really solid takeaway from the session. So thank you for spending this half an hour with us. We didn't give you an easy session, but I think we took some really concrete learnings away from it. Thank you so much for being my guest. So this was Steve Trussell, Chief Consultant at Total Sourcing Solutions and one of the AOP SpendPros.
If this episode struck a chord with you, please do send it to somebody. We grow here at Art of Procurement through word of mouth, and that would be really appreciated. You can also support us by giving us a thumbs up, a star rating, or a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Since 2015, we've built the world's largest free resource for procurement professionals looking to elevate their impact. Our resources span podcasts like this, videos, blog posts, papers, and events. To join us on the inside and to ensure you never miss an episode, a webinar, an event, or a post, please do subscribe to our weekly newsletter, This Week in Procurement. You can do that at artofprocurement.com/subscribe. That's artofprocurement.com/subscribe. Thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.